I'm sure most of you heard already that the WBO has denied Dillian White's appeal and upholds Alexander Usyk as the mandatory challenger to the WBO title, the title that Andy Ruiz is currently in possession of. And what this basically denotes is that Dillian White is in many ways double fucked. You heard it right the first time, kids. He is double fucked. Why is that? I'll tell you why. What the WBO is basically saying is that Dillian White, if he is reinstated as the mandatory challenger for the green belt, if that provisional suspension is lifted, that makes him ineligible to be the mandatory for the brown belt. That he can't be the mandatory for both. Because if that provisional suspension is lifted, he will be the interim champion. And as a champion of any kind,
even if it's just an interim champion,
the WBO won't rank him. Not without prior approval from the WBC and their Board of Governors. But all the same, what the WBO is basically saying is that if Dillian White's provisional suspension is lifted, he's not eligible to become a mandatory for the WBO.
Can't do both.
Now that's in the event that this provisional suspension from the WBC is lifted. That's saying that if Dillian White is reinstated as the interim champion for the green belt, he cannot simultaneously contest for a mandatory spot with the brown belt. That's what that means. That's if the suspension is lifted. Now, in the event that the suspension is not lifted, in the event that the suspension itself is upheld by the WBC, what the WBO is saying is that that gives them the precedence to take measures against Dillian White. That they are effectively falling in line and following suit with whatever the WBC decides to do, whether they decide to rescind this provisional suspension or uphold it. In that way, Dillian White is double fucked. That he cannot pursue an opportunity with another alphabet, another organization,
at least not theirs,
while he's waiting for the WBC to make a decision, to deliver a ruling. That at this point, he can't pursue an opportunity with the WBO, not until that situation with the WBC is reconciled. And even if it is, even if he is reinstated as the mandatory challenger, he still won't be eligible to become the WBO's mandatory challenger unless the WBC approves it. He is very much subject to the powers that be.
and you know, the WBO falling in line, following suit to whatever the WBC does, that's strange.
A recent revelation, because this hasn't always been the case. I mean, not that long ago,
in 2017,
while Alexander Povetkin was still under suspension via the WBC, the WBO actually let him fight for a version of their title, a regional version of the belt, but better still, a WBO title. So they didn't take the stance with Povetkin that they're taking with Dillian White, to where they're going to wait for the WBC to decide what they want to do, and the WBO will adhere to that. No, these guys afforded Povetkin an opportunity to fight for a title while he was still under suspension via the WBC. So why are they taking this stance with Dillian White?
That's the question.
Take a second to process this information. Understand that Alexander Povetkin was a guy who tested positive not once, but twice. And that's what got him suspended via the WBC. He tested positive for meldonium ahead of the Wilder fight, and he tested positive for Osterin ahead of the Bermain-Stavern final eliminator. And what's funny about that situation is that Povetkin's situation was in many ways more egregious than what's going on with Dillian White. When it comes to Dillian White, it is a sordid affair for more reasons than one. Whereas with Povetkin, you know, not only did this guy test positive for one banned substance that just made the banned list, but he tested positive for another one that was already on the banned list for a much longer duration of time. And yet the WBO saw fit to let this guy fight for a version of their title, to rank him anyway, in spite of him being under suspension with the WBC. And that was a guy involved in a more egregious situation. So why are you getting on your high horse all of a sudden with Dillian White, when Dillian White, as far as VADA is concerned, VADA, who helps the WBC co-run the clean boxing program, as far as they're concerned, this guy was a clean fighter. He passed both his pre- and post-fight tests. So if the WBC decides to uphold or withdraw a sanction based on VADA's findings, and VADA didn't find anything, then why is Dillian White, quote-unquote, provisionally suspended?
Yeah!
What's the nature of the suspension?
Yeah!
The anti-doping agency that you employ, the results that you adhere to, their findings
VADA's are the basis as to whether or not you decide to suspend a guy or not suspend a guy. But if VADA didn't find anything, then why is he provisionally suspended? What's going on here? And why all of a sudden in this situation is the WBO falling in line to whatever the WBC decides to do when that's not what they've done in the past?
And the funniest thing about that provisional suspension, quote unquote, from the WBC is that it doesn't actually prohibit Dillian White from fighting. I mean, this is from the horse's mouth. This is from the WBC president, Mauricio Suleiman himself, that Dillian White is not suspended from competition. And the only thing that this suspension actually does is rescind his status as the mandatory challenger. Now, some people, myself included, might find that rather convenient. You see, I'm of the opinion, I'm sure you guys are too, some of you out there are, that the WBC has been working hard to make things difficult for Dillian White, to prevent him from getting that title shot at Deontay Wilder. And this could just be another chapter in the same book, that this entire sordid affair was taken as an opportunity by the WBC to do what they've been doing, and that's stifle Dillian White's opportunity, his title shot at the green belt. That's what it looks like, because you haven't banned him from fighting. I mean, that's according to Mauricio Suleiman himself. They haven't banned him from fighting. All they've really done is rescind his status as the WBC's interim champion. But why? His VADA test didn't come up dirty, right? And your clean boxing program is co-run by VADA. You decide what to do based on their findings. Well, they didn't find anything, so what's the problem? Now, I'm going to reiterate something to you guys that I said in a previous video. And it's that even if the alphabets don't want to do their job, even if Dillian White, for one reason or another, cannot get a world title opportunity via the powers that be, guess what? That's not the only way for him to get a crack at a world title. At any point, one of these titleists could decide to fight him as a voluntary. Okay, Deontay Wilder's got what? 9 title defenses? Only 2 of them were against mandatory challenges. The other 7 were voluntaries, hand-picked guys that he so chose to give that opportunity. Guys like Luis Ortiz,
remember,
who tested positive for 2 banned substances throughout the course of his career, yet Deontay Wilder so chose to give that guy a shot anyway. So don't be fooled by the bureaucratic red tape. This doesn't change the dynamic of what's going on. That if Dillian White so chose to go through these channels to try to get a world title opportunity, it's because Deontay Wilder doesn't seem to want to give him one. He's more focused on blackmailing Dillian White.
Did you guys forget that not but a few months ago, in March, Deontay Wilder was quoted as saying, exclusively to World Boxing News, mind you, that he'd give Dillian White the shot if he signs to the PBC.
He isn't the one imposing conditions on big fights. You sure? Can you guys imagine for a moment if Deontay said, anybody who fights me has to sign for 3 or 4 fights with Showtime and PBC?
Actually, yes, I can imagine it. In fact, I can quote it, I can cite it, because Deontay Wilder admitted as much to World Boxing News back in March. That those are basically the conditions that he set forth for Dillian White to get a title shot. That he's got to sign with the PBC. Oh, granted, that Deontay Wilder didn't say he has to sign on for 2 or 3 fights, but better still, he did say he has to sign on. That he has to make some form of a commitment to the PBC in order to get that title shot. Now, why would a title shot at what is a world champion of the world, supposedly, why is a shot against the world champion contingent upon him signing to the same banner as you?
He isn't the one imposing conditions on big fights.
Yeah, that statement didn't age well. I mean, essentially what I'm communicating here is that in the back of everyone's minds, they know that for one reason, for some reason or another, Deontay Wilder won't willingly give White the shot, in which case the only way for White to get it is to force the fight by becoming a mandatory challenger. Think about it this way. There's all this attention, all this reporting centered around whether or not Dillian White can become a mandatory challenger. But in other instances, those kinds of stories, they don't get that same time and attention, not from the fans, not from the pros, and not from the pundits. Nobody was clawing at their faces when Povetkin became the mandatory via the WBA, or Pulev via the IBF, or Usyk via the WBO. Mandatory challengers get crowned all the time in various weight classes. Yet in the case of Dillian White, there was a lot of attention centered on that because everybody knows that Wilder won't willingly give him the shot, so that was really Dillian White's only avenue to force the fight. Because everybody knows
is Wilder, for one reason, for some reason or another, he won't give him the shot. I mean, even I think Deontay Wilder could knock out Dillian White. I think he stands a good chance of doing that. But if that's the case, why is he so resistant to that fight? Why won't he simply give the guy the shot to shut him up? To shut up the critics, to shut up the naysayers? I mean, Deontay Wilder's resume is pretty thin as it is. And Dillian White is ranked as a consensus top 10 fighter. Division by division top 10 fighter. Not just the top 10 via one of the alphabets, but one of the best guys at the weight. Wilder's resume being as thin as it is, it could use the name of Dillian White. That would be a decorative item on what is already a very thin resume. The bottom line here is, people, that the only reason we've been giving so much time and attention to this, it's because we know that Wilder won't willingly give him the shot. So at what point does Wilder nut the fuck up and say, I want to shut this guy up? I'm not going to wait for some organization to give me an ultimatum, force me to fight the guy. It's not that serious. I can beat this guy easy, and I can rack up a multi-million-dollar payday in the process of it. Light day's work. He called Dillian White a crash test dummy, right? I mean, these are Deontay Wilder's own words, verbatim. If this guy's a crash test dummy, then why don't you just shut him the fuck up already? Instead of waiting for an organization to force you to do it, why don't you do it yourself? That's the question, people. Now, just in keeping with the theme of heavyweights and heavyweight candor, heavyweight action, whenever there is some, Deontay Wilder was quoted as saying that just because Anthony Joshua lost doesn't mean that it's over. And in the article, he covered many of the familiar talking points that he feels that Anthony Joshua quit, that he overlooked Andy Ruiz, and he was looking for a way out because he was more than he could deal with. But in spite of that, it's not over for him. That, a lot of emphasis is placed on an undefeated record, but better still, it's not over for Anthony Joshua. And he goes on to talk about how he wants to become an undisputed champion, that he is not going to stop until he accomplishes that. And this denotes what I mentioned in a previous video, folks, that if Anthony Joshua manages to bounce back in the Andy Ruiz rematch, all that retirement talk that we've been seeing from Deontay Wilder, all of that will get put on hold. Because the reality of things is that Anthony Joshua, even today, even on the heels of a crushing defeat, he still represents the biggest payday for just about everybody out there. So imagine if Anthony Joshua gets his belts back. Imagine if he beats Andy Ruiz in sensational fashion. What that will do for Anthony Joshua's profile and his marquee value overall. In that way, the incentive to stick around long enough to have that Anthony Joshua fight, it comes right back into the picture. Right back into the picture for a parasite like Deontay Wilder. I mean, think about it. He walked away from that $100 million deal, right? And Deontay Wilder's sycophants, his legion of butt boys, they thought that was the smartest fucking thing in the world, him doing that. But ask yourself a question. In walking away from that $100 million deal, $20 million for Brazil, $80 million for 2 Anthony Joshua fights. In walking away from that deal, did he walk into a similar deal just like it?
Hell
no. Hell, he didn't even walk into $20 million. The Zone offered this guy $20 million to have that fight. Whereas what the reports are suggesting is that he made way less than that, $10 million. That corroborates what I said a couple of months ago. That Showtime ain't putting up $20 million for that Brazil fight. No fucking way. No way. That, maybe they'll compensate him with a couple of million off the top, but they're not going to put up that kind of money for that kind of a fight. It just stands to reason. Economically, fiscally, it makes absolutely no sense. So this fucking genius, Deontay Wilder, he literally turned down more money for less money. And what we're seeing here is that Wilder is experiencing a form of buyer's remorse, in a manner of speaking. Buyer's remorse for buying into his own bullshit that he spews whenever you put a camera in front of this guy. That, look, you can talk that shit. You can say whatever the fuck you want. But at the end of the day, Anthony Joshua is still the money man. And you better fucking damn well fucking hope that this guy bounces back.
For your sake.
Because he still represents the biggest cash fight at the weight. Now, all of a sudden, Wilder cares about belts again.
Ain't that a bitch?
A couple of months ago, he seemed happy with just the one.
At this point in time, it ain't even about the belts no more, baby. It ain't as I said, I'm the most talked about, I'm the hottest fighter in the world right now, and I got one belt. And I got one belt that means more than any other belts. That's that green belt, that WBC, the most precious.
What are you gonna do now, Wilder fans? Accuse me of lying? twisting the narrative, twisting the truth. Those are your boy's own words. He wasn't worried about them other belts, and that was that interview, that's from only a couple of months ago. So all of a sudden, this guy's aspiring to become an undisputed champion? Bitch, please. You know, in November of this year, Deontay Wilder will make 11 years as a professional boxer. 11 fucking years, this guy ain't been undisputed yet. 11 years, this guy ain't unified yet. But you're expecting me to believe that this is something that he aspires to? No.
No.
There's been plenty of time, plenty of opportunity to make that shit happen, okay? Actions speak louder than words, and as far as Wilder's actions, or the lack thereof, all they seem to communicate is that this was a guy who, only a couple of months ago, wasn't prioritizing becoming an undisputed champion. And what he was prioritizing was a Tyson Fury rematch.
And an Ortiz rematch.
I mean, I don't want to sound repetitive. I don't want to mull over the same old talking points, but this is the reality of things, people, and if we're going to address it in full scope to get a full view of the picture, these are the realities of Deontay Wilder. This guy ain't worried about achieving goals. That's not the kind of fighter that he is. Anthony Joshua in 6 years came closer to becoming an undisputed champion than Wilder has in 11.
3 world titles in 6 years to 1 world title in 11.
Deontay Wilder is not that kind of a goal-oriented athlete. I'm sorry, okay? I give a fuck about what the sound bites say or what the quotes are, what the interviews read, what the headlines are. I don't care about any of that shit because the only thing that matters is what's actually being put into practice. And when you have a fighter who turns down $100 million offer to make less so that he can stay on the same network that he's been on, after telling the world that he's a network free agent, when this is the sequence of events, all that communicates is that this guy is not what he's saying he is, and he's not what you want him to be.